Thank you.
Okay,
All right, we're live.
I'll bring to order the meeting of the Executive Board of the Education Coalition Communities 2.0. Present we have today Sean Mahone, Vice Chair. We have Mark, remote. Introduce yourselves for the recording.
That's Paul DeJane.
Terry Murphy.
For staff, we have,
Jim Merrill.
And Kathy Fox.
all right. All votes, to the extent that there will be any votes, will be done by roll call because we have one participant operating remotely. So first item will be the, I don't have that in front of me. Is the acceptance of the minutes of May 24th, 2022. Entertain a motion.
Move it to be accepted.
Okay,
Second.
second. Any further discussion, or any comments on the minutes of May 24th, 2022? There being none, we'll do a roll call vote. Mark?
Aye.
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 And aye. Motion passes unanimously. The minutes are approved. Okay. And then I believe legislative update will be the next item.
Yes, you've had, I think you all received the recent legislative update sent last Friday. You'll see many of the bills are still in the process of being enrolled. The governor is, I have to say, this time around, he's signing bills a little quicker. Last year wasn't like till August, September. So what I'll continue is keeping you updated as they become law. I don't know if you have any questions on the bills, on the chart. I will add that bill of concern, that House Bill 1680, in my notes from last Friday, work session had not been scheduled for June. So if there will be one, it won't be until September after Labor Day. There's no legislative activity in July and August, except for standing commissions, statutory commissions that have been meeting regularly. But I doubt very much we'll see anything in July and August. But, we'll keep a pulse. The calendars will still come out. If something comes up, we'll let you know. There. I don't know if you have any questions on, again, and before you know it, the bills will be filed again come September 6th. Incumbents that are running again can start filing again. So you have maybe a brief period of a little pause of legislation, and it ramps up again.
The 6th is the opening day or the closing day?
The opening date. And the closing date's like the following, just check my calendar.
And that's just for the incumbents who are seeking to come back. There'll be a separate bill filing periods later in the fall.
For incumbents is September 16th, and then November 9th is the first day for all reps to file legislative service requests.
We don't have a date yet for the second.
Yes, I think.
But you're right, generally.
Yeah.
The Senate period will be different, almost
right.
certainly. Yeah.
They I thought maybe in the previous calendar showing there was some dates, unless I'm imagining it, I thought I saw some dates. but
We know it's later anyway. So
It's
we-
I think it's been in one of the emails that's gone out. We'll go back and dig
Yeah,
it back
we'll
up.
look at that one, yeah.
Normally, doesn't that go to November? Did I get that wrong? It's in October. Remember? I forget what it was this year.
Or
For the Senate, in terms of the deadline by which they have to submit them. I know they have to go to the
the October,
election.
right, well, October deadlines are for, well, that would apply to the
Interim
Senate.
study reports.
Yeah, that's for the House, for the House. And the same will actually be the Senate, even though they don't do.
So we've got
Right.
some time.
So there is some
Correct,
time,
yeah.
exactly.
So the big time for us is going to be December. Well, we won't even have the LSRs, but.
You should, actually, they could start coming out, just title
Titles,
only.
yeah.
Right. we won't
Titles,
have
no
the
language.
body, no
Yeah.
language.
But the titles will tell us the story, and then we can track down sponsors and see what's going on and whether it's something we should be
And I
concerned with.
suspect if returning members, bills they filed this session, they'll file again, if they didn't get passed, there'll be a repeat. Kind of like Groundhog Day on some of the matters, to say the least.
Perpetual Groundhog Day. Correct. So
So our activity will ramp up towards the end of November to December, January. By December into January, February. Cycle.
Correct. And they keep
Unless
them-
our communication strategy dictates something different,
Yes.
which is a later discussion.
Well, not much later.
Right.
Item number 4.
Oh, there we go.
Communication update.
Well, just before that and more related to legislature, but it will be a segue on 1680,
Yes.
given that it's kind of just floating and floating. There's not much they're going to be able to do by a October 28th report if they only start unless, I don't know if everyone remembers seeing, I forwarded the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy
Right.
Institute when it came out for the first time I saw.
Yeah.
Promoting the School Funding Commission's recommendations. Did they hijack that?
I mean,
Not hijack is a little strong, but I could see the interim study committee is under a deadline. Oh, they've already written it for us. Okay, let's just use what their recommendations are.
Oh, I see
That's
the direction.
simplistic, but yeah.
listen, I operate under the assumption like anything's possible, which is,
Right.
like we've been told that this summer, no legislative activity. They could always decide, we'll do 1680 in the first week of August and have a hearing. So, so to your point, it's possible, but the makeup of this committee is such, which is still, run by the Republicans. I doubt that there's going to be much stomach to adopt things that go too far afield. They've talked a lot, earlier in the year about the complexity of this, the need to, care, consideration, and engagement. So it's a good question. And it may be they just throw up their hands and say, you know what, we've got a new legislative session coming, leave it an open question, and then see new bills filed. Either way, whether they do something with that vehicle or new bills filed, come January, we'll be dealing with it. So,
And I
but
think
yeah, go ahead.
what's interesting, we were at that meeting in Dover.
Right.
And there was a consensus and let me just say, when I left there that night, one takeaway, and I said to Jim, I said, Dover, Beasley, I mean, they're kind of finding, okay, we're the victim, but that could change. I mean, you see the development at Dover.
Mhm.
And I said to Jim, they're not a Claremont. I'm just saying, however, I think there's a consensus that they start doing a special tax, it's going to affect the single thing. The reps are going to look at their town and they're going to go, oh, my tax dollar is going up, I'm not supporting it. Oh, my tax dollar is going, it's going to be the same money. They got to, and that did come up in that presentation. In Dover, it could switch next year. I just thought that was
Yeah.
interesting.
I don't know if you shared the comment, but the specific comment was
Yes.
Portsmouth just hires a whole bunch of lawyers and lobbyists
Lobbyists, yes.
and kills everything. And it was only over $32 million, a paltry sum.
And that was the meeting that Representative Peter Schmidt was there, because I know him very well. So when they done, I'm like, I'm getting out of here. I'm like, he knows
You don't
it.
want it?
And he's very nice, don't get me wrong, but he's so nice. And he goes, well, one of my favorite puppies here, Kathy, would you? Kathy got out of the building. Pronto.
Before we jump off legislation real quick, do you want to just go over a little bit, kind of the post-filing, so we've got a slate of candidates now. That Friday, June 11th was filed, and by that late next week, the parties have a chance to fill the slots that are remaining. So I think we're going to just talk briefly about some of the, notable characters that are choosing not to come back, retiring essentially. So.
Sure, but let me just start if I could. So I did go through. It's always interesting to look at big pictures. Some of a few more free staters that signed up, like Key and all that. Interesting. But closer to home and of interest, House Education, with the exception of 2 reps, they're all seeking re-election. Sue Mullen, which surprised me from Bedford, she's not on the list anywhere, and I haven't seen it to ask her. I've not heard that she was not going to run, but I did double check. She's not on the list. And Marjorie Porter, she had just stated earlier she wasn't going to, so no surprises there. But Rick Ladd, Lynn Cordelli, same with Dave Lunar and Mel Myler, they have seen the election. So who's not coming back? Interestingly, for several chairs and vice chairs, and I think because of some acrimonious issues under the Gold Dome, shall we say? So one of my reps, Kim Rice from Hudson, who chaired Children's Family Law, is not running again. She got involved with that. The parental consent. She didn't agree. Anyhow,
Right.
Vice Chair Deborah D. Simone from Atkinson. Is she still like the tax collector, I think, in Atkinson?
I believe she is,
Okay.
actually.
Criminal Justice, Daryl Abbas is the chair. He's going to run for Chuck Morse's seat. He's not returning. Same with election law, Barbara Griffin. She's going to run for state senate, District 16. That's Kavanaugh's.
Yep.
And Kevin Kavanaugh is going to, he's seeking Ted Gassis on the council. And, Howard Pearl, who's the chair of Environment Agriculture. He's going to seek the District 17, John Reagan
John
seat,
Reagan's
state
seat.
senate. So he's not returning. Finance, not much is changing. Oh, Timothy Lane from Sanbornton, I believe. He was in
Running.
chair of Fish and Game. He's running the Senate.
We're gonna have a pretty significantly different cast of characters in the Senate. That'll be at least a third turned over, including, Senator Morris leaving. That'll be a leadership change at the very top.
Oh, exactly. I was disappointed, Representative Gordon Bristol, who was chair of Judiciary, is not returning. He was chatting. He said to me, I know that he seek a Senate seat. He chose not to. Another long time serving Representative John Greer from Bedford. He's not returning. I think, again, he said to me, as I had enough. Another longtime representative, Al Baldassaro from Londonderry. He's not returning. I think he wants to spend, how do you say it to me? Let's do more time in Florida with the wife, and I'm close to Mar-a-Lago in case that needed. I just love the guy. I'm gonna miss him. Representative Will just from Plastow, who's chaired Ways and
Long
Means.
time wasted.
Long time. It's not. But I think
So the
it's-
policy committees will, that we care about will largely be the same. Not to say they won't be constituted differently depending on the leadership structure of the House. But
Yeah, and looking at, drilling down, Susan Almody, who's chaired that in the past. I know that's her passion. Assuming she's reelected for one of these Ways and Means again. So I think that's, and then of course, the big picture of council, what's going to be interesting, District 2, City of Wilmington, former councilor Mike Crines they're going to have a primary. He got shifted. He used to be District 1 in the redistricting. He's in 2. And that's really interesting. Now she's raised a ton of money. So she's very, very strong in fundraising. So we'll see how that works out there. And former Senator Harold French, Canterbury, is seeking that seat. So it will be interesting. And I think this afternoon, or maybe it's over, the governor and the Republican councils were having a fundraiser to keep the council Republicans, and that is today. So, yeah,
Is Cryans opposed by anybody?
I'm sorry.
yeah, so he's challenging Cindy Warmington in a primary, which I suspect he'll lose. She's going to win. She's well funded.
Yeah.
The whole congressional delegations endorsed her. But I think from our purposes, there's a lot of institutional memory leaving the building. There'll be some new people in positions of authority that haven't been there before. And then, of course, we'll see where the balance of power shifts if, Democrats take it back or not.
So last week, when I was in the CAF, there was a couple things going on. Oh, was it finance, house finance? And what's nice about New Hampshire, you don't know who you run into. And then comes the Speaker of the House, you're in packet, and we was talking to myself and a colleague, and just, chit-chatting. And he did say that they are planning on remaining in power. They've already scheduled orientations. Everything just kind of shared with us their game plans, and was always gracious. Said, if you have any issues with clients, please don't hesitate to come see us. So he's already focused that they're returning.
We'll see.
Well, there
We'll
seems to
see.
be some wind to that, they're not getting more liberal in New Hampshire right now.
Well, the redistricting maps have been obviously snapped that way. So we'll see. I think transitioning perhaps to the next topic, communication, goes to speaking to some of these folks, particularly as they get through the primary, and we know who the slate of characters are, but will be important to try and pin down where folks are, what they're thinking, how much knowledge base they have. My guess is a lot, I'll be curious to see how many have really much knowledge at all about how things work, any history. So that's work that, as things get quiet in the State House, hopefully the next few months we'll get some of that intelligence and sort of build a knowledge base to use going into the fall.
So the Kennedy survey is going out.
It's not out yet.
Oh, it's not out.
So so we got delayed. So after the Secretary of State finalized the list, they then did something which disrupted a lot of people, which is every year they make it all the candidates' names and addresses available in an Excel format, so people can readily use it for the purposes that we would. In other words, they did a PDF and would not change that. So that pushed us back a bit. But it'll be in boxes after the 4th. And we've updated it. I know everyone had a couple of comments on it, including that image, which thank you, Paul, pointed out that one of the images was
Maine.
Maine. And so you recognize that I did, the printer was horrified. So they promptly fixed it with a good old fashioned New Hampshire image. And so those returns will come to our office. And so, then I'll do the process of kind of compiling information, data, sense of who's responded, who hasn't. And then after a time, we can talk about perhaps outreach to members or candidates who haven't responded, to invite them to, and try and just boost a little bit more turnout so we can get as much data as possible. But we'll be getting it, here over the next month. I expect they'll come in drips and drabs, but I think ultimately we're doing close to 900 mailings. They were on the ballot. And we
I
did.
don't remember. Was there a deadline put in there?
I don't believe we did. I don't believe we did. I think that we'll get what we get. We'll chase the rest. We'll call through. I believe we sent one to the governor. We did not. I don't believe we sent to the executive counselors. Everyone else is getting it. Reps and senators on both parties. So.
All right. What else do we have on communications?
Well, we were going to have an updated communications plan.
Yeah.
From the previous
I want
draft that is now, I think, 6 months beyond the window of the plan.
Well, I'd like to talk about it. I want to, as I was playing with this and what was written and what maybe to write going forward here, I'd like to, maybe get some consensus about what we feel we ought to do, what we feel like we can do realistically. The survey is a communications piece, which is good.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be important. It'll be a focus of our effort. Before we talked a lot about some other social media aspects and, and roundtable, type things. And it ended up not being timely, in a large sense. And I do want to get a sense from you as we think about where we're positioned versus where the other organizations are that are obviously, they've got a very direct purpose in mind, which is to take the system and change it, significantly. We're obviously looking at it from a different, I would say less disruptive perspective. But from your standpoint of tools, techniques, how out there do we want to be on this? How do I will say this, one thing that I would like to do, and I would strongly recommend, that I think it's a ancillary to the survey, at least within our member communities. I think we need to invite these members in and try and come up with a conversation and have a conversation, a facilitated conversation, and not just in the board communities, the joint board, but the full board, if we can do it. If we can get close to 30 communities, whether it's a representative from that community that represents CC 2.0's perspective, to invite the reps and say, hey, let's have a coffee meeting about education funding. I want to get your gut sense of where we are. I think that supplementing the survey would be perhaps the most important work that we do. I'm not convinced, and I've not seen, the data that I've seen on this, and I will grant you it's limited. There's not, from the public perspective, surveys don't pick up this issue. Surveys pick up the economy, drugs. I think reproductive rights are now going to be a much more significant issue over the next 6 months, much more significant. So, aggressive public messaging on this, I'm not sure how much that's going to buy us. I think right now we've got a universe of people who will have a direct say in this. And our ability through this survey and then ideally a follow-up local conversation, is going to be our best bet in the short term. But I really wanted to get some input about where people's are on this before I go down the road of putting this big thing together or this modest thing together to understand where everyone's kind of sitting, what they think.
Well, I think per the MOU, we're supposed to have a general membership meeting in July anyway. So your thought coincides with that requirement. So, and I think it's important to ensure continuing membership, that we have that type of communication, because we really haven't had broad base, although we do send out the agenda to all the members.
Although just got an email that says that Guilford is dropping out.
Oh,
I saw it from Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have that as a discussion item in just a minute. Do you want to do that now?
go ahead, Mark.
Well, I received this notice a couple of days ago. I've been on the road since I received it, so I just sent it out to everyone. It's a notice from Scott Dunn that Guilford is dropping out of the coalition. That's going to have two impacts. Obviously, the impact of their $3,775 on the budget side, but also one of the larger communities will be out. So
they're dropping out as of a meeting.
yes, they are not sending their check-in, and they are leaving the coalition.
I don't know if the MOU actually contemplated, it was kind of a 2-year commitment, but
It was, yes. And I don't know if you want me to call Scott Dunn or how you want me to handle that.
well, in part, this is part of my fear is that we haven't had much communication, nor have we had much to communicate. Exactly, a good way of putting it. So attrition is certainly a possibility.
Mhm.
And until, it's like I always say, nothing's important to anyone until it's important.
So
This right now doesn't seem important. I mean, we even started this legislature season saying, all the Republicans in charge, it'll never happen. Well, we know stranger things have happened, but they were right this time around. So
so this is actually timely. I don't know if everyone's seen this, but I did want to talk about this today as well. This was just today. Another education funding lawsuit has been filed by the former Claremont lawyers, Andy Walensky and John Tobin, in Grafton County Superior. New Hampshire Business Review had that today. That's going to exactly where you would expect it to go, to turn the education funding system. So as we think about July, I think, the full membership meeting obviously makes sense. We talked about that. We can talk about, the theory of the case, but where the legislature is. Some modest blocking and tackling, bought time. They haven't dealt with this. But the Conval suit's pending. I checked the docket yesterday just to update myself on it. Appears from what I can see that it has been scheduled for trial in April of 23, which of course then whatever happens there, but this suit has been filed in Grafton County. We'll run a parallel track, albeit a different timetable. And we don't know this upcoming legislative session. I mean, even, because this isn't necessarily a partisan issue. There's been no appetite to deal with this. And we do know from being in committees, listening to the legislators that, Kath can check me on this. They've said, this is in the courts. Like the court's dealing with this. Maybe we ought to just, is that right? There's been some deference there, knowing this is ongoing. But as part of a communication, having that meeting and talking about two now pending lawsuits, the uncertainty of the upcoming year. And regardless of whether there's, we know there will be bills on this next year. We know there will be. I know it, we all know it. At a minimum, we've just got to make sure we're talking to these people and, we're in the room and in their ear. So certainly happy to do a broader conversation with a broader group about where things sit and why we've bought some time here, but we're coming up to a couple of critical junctures on the road where, if you want the message to be, now's not the time to kind of pull back, but just like kind of stay in the game, because one way or another, in the next 18 months, it's going to get dealt with. Pretty sure.
I would suggest that being in July is not going to produce a whole lot of response. I would suggest a letter to each one of these committees, the boards of selectmen and school boards, quite frankly. I think that's the most, this is an effective strategy NHMA uses. When there's an issue, they get it out, they have the means by which to do that. We don't have the sophisticated means that they have, but we certainly can send a letter out to the school board and to the boards of selectmen or city councils. And I would send them beyond just the ones that we think are going to be the most impacted by that. Paul did some work on that. Because I'm looking at what my school education funding component, the state portion of that, and I can say this is how much we would lose. This money would go to the state. Worst case scenario, all of it would go to the state. And then the rest, we'd have to make up if we want to keep the same level of education. I think refreshing people's memory on that issue, because you have some of those boards might have changed already, and getting those school boards back on board with that, the impact of that, because the school district will be the one that had the biggest issue, because they have to say, well, it's $2.48 in the tax rate. If all of it was taken and sent to Concord and distributed to other communities, then we'd have to make up. That's either pretty significant cuts or significant increases or a combination of the two. So I think driving the point home again, but I don't think you're gonna get a whole lot of people going to show up in July. And if you do, you might get one interested party from a town or city instead of getting it out. In most places, when a letter of correspondence goes like that, it goes to everybody in that board or committee. So they all have a chance to read it. I think that's one of the most effective ways right now for us to communicate to people, is to refresh their memory, remind them of why we're doing what we're doing, and remind them of the threat, the updated information you just talked about, of where we're at. We got 2 lawsuits pending. Speaking of which, who do they represent for the scheme children?
Does it say?
Their client.
I have the article right here, Sean. It just basically states, I think they're just bringing it back. Let's see, Andrew Linsky, John Tobin, and this Natalie LaFlamme, who's in the second grade of Berlin, filed suit. So basically, they're saying who represented Claremont School District and 4 others along with this young gal. It was a student. But to your point, they're arguing the plaintiffs and time and again that the local property tax and SWIFT are unconstitutional because of the inaccuracies of property values. And that's that's their suit.
Yeah, so it's,
What is this? Repeat that. Could you repeat that? What is it?
Sure. That the petitioners argue that both the local school tax and SWIFT, which together represent 2/3 of our revenue replacement funding, are unconstitutional. Basically, because as local property values differ wildly across the state, making uniform education tax rates a mathematical impossibility.
That's not necessarily in opposition to what we're looking at. Anyway, they could be now.
Right.
But anyway, my point is in the communications, I think that's what we need to do at this particular point. And what's going to happen is when we get some piece of legislation, we get a chance, we have a short window, probably before the hearing on that, to re-communicate that out to people. This is what's being proposed now. We need to be prepared for that when that comes. And again, I think we need a broader group, not just the individual, but the communities that are most directly impacted, not just the ones in our coalition, but the others as well. And to whip up that support in their school boards, which we don't have any single school board that's on board with us right now.
so I think we could probably do both. I mean,
Because they're not mutually exclusive.
Right, I think-
In terms of by the MOU, we have to have a meeting. I think it's important to solidify our base, sort of a wider, hey, you guys, we've been working on your behalf, whether you're a member or not, and whether you know it or not.
Right,
And here's the horizon as we're seeing it again.
right.
Because we also cease to exist December 31st, 2022.
Right.
Unless we re-up the MOU. So we're gonna have to have a recruiting campaign in the fall anyway.
Right.
To re-up and maybe bring in new. Or maybe we'll just all decide now no one's interested in it anymore and we'll just let it go.
Why would, I'm curious, coming back to Guilford, what's behind the scenes on why a town of that size with $3,000 is gonna make a big difference to them? We're not talking,
You probably don't see it
Fraction.
correctly.
what's that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been typically, I think they were one of the first to kind of say, why are we doing this? Because there's no real possibility that this worst case scenario is happening. So,
There's a lot of pissed off people up there with the tax bills.
Hmm.
You know, one way. or the
and again,
other.
if we haven't had much to communicate, then we're
Yeah,
solidifying the belief in the first place.
Because the other thing we're gonna have is we go into the fall, despite what others may say, this economy is taking a nosedive. And that's gonna impact boards of selectmen and city councils when it comes to setting budgets and all that. That pressure's gonna be on. Food prices are up, and electricity prices just doubled or more than doubled, and all the other issues that are going on, you know, I can't help but think that's gonna have an impact on the budgeting process as we get to the fall calendar year budget.
Yeah, but this is gonna be, you gotta position this place that, more as an insurance policy that would allow us to have a voice in this, because otherwise it's gonna get lost in the shuffle.
Now, they might want to
You know?
cut this, though. They may say this is worth, you know, if we gotta cut something, we'll cut our funding support to this. That's what I'm concerned about. If it's the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and right now there isn't much squeaky.
So we can talk about just the July meeting for a second. So we don't have a date for that. We had dates through June. We bumped this one, obviously. So when would you like to do this? Because I think, to your point, if we do it in late July, and then we could draft a letter in advance and have it approved and ready to roll, that follows, we just had this meeting. Here's where we are. We're in an election cycle. Here's what's happening. Here's what happened in the legislature this year. Here are these pending lawsuits. Here are the bill filing periods. So we're going to know in 6 to 8 weeks. We're going to start just a very short time. We can kind of methodically lay it out for people so they see. And then we're coming to this, again, this moment where, you know, the legal path and the legislative path are going to at some point intersect. And we can't predict what's going to happen in November. Or we predict this because one party controls that they're going to go a certain way. But what we do know is, to your point about insurance policy, these are things that are happening, that will happen, and that we're trying to be in the room on.
And I think we also include, you know, the other groups that are actively pushing their agenda, be it complementary ours or completely opposite ours. At least we know there are other players trying to take a seat. And if we're not there taking a seat,
Right.
then there may not be any seats left. I think the fiscal policy institute actually did us a favor. You can actually point to their article and say, see, there are groups advocating the commission's funding formula, which, oh, by the way, remember, that was going to double your education budget, but you weren't going to say they benefited out of it, like Portsmouth. You know, that's a good piece to remind people it's important.
We can work that in.
Yeah.
So
So let's say that the courts turn around. There's a strong likelihood they'll go along with inequalities going on in the system. And then, so where does the money come from? Will they increase the statewide, I don't know what to call it, the statewide property tax, which is basically, just give me a number. So if you increase what's the $360 million fund? It's called,
Education trust fund.
yeah, the education trust, and just increase the size of it and send the money. And then all you're gonna do is, whatever town you're in, multiply that number times your new equalized value that you have, that has gone through the absolute freaking roof. You know, you have no idea how that's gonna come out. I mean, will they just do same old, or are they trying to do a different source of funding to calm the taxpayers?
It's gonna be tough to do that, to raise that property tax. It's gonna be an awful bitter pill to swallow, the legislature. That, and you know, everybody's gonna stand up and say, yeah, we're gonna raise local property. They've been doing everything to avoid that. But to go and do that, I think more likely that right now there'll be no increase, but they'll take what's there but elsewhere to other communities. That's a little bit easier to do. Now, granted, we're gonna be screaming, but you are gonna be raising taxes in our communities.
Sure.
But still, it's a lot more palatable to say, wait, we're gonna increase this tax rate. I don't know if people are gonna wanna do that, especially with the economy starting to go down.
Well, than everything else, you look at the electric prices, you know, when they start getting their bills from Utilities, I never saw this after
Yep.
August.
Did you see the proposal for doubling the rate?
And the PUC, from what I'm understanding, I don't understand it from what I read, they have to approve it as the default, so, but I mean, everything, yes, but so people, it's gonna be tough, and you're right, but to shift it, the money's here to kind of shift it,
The money's already there.
it's already there.
Right.
And to shift it. It's almost like I still try to get my head around, they reduced that 360 million to the 260 and this, you know, we're not making any property taxes. I know, just shifting it, but it's, to your point, they're not raising it.
Right. That's far more powerful.
It is powerful.
So if we can kind of come to some understanding when we'd like to propose a meeting in July, then we can work to prepare a communication to go out immediately afterwards that indicates we held the meeting, we recap things, here's where we are, and get it to whomever you want the universe to be, which would mean if we do it in late July, it would hit in early August. And that would give us about a month before we start seeing LSRs wash up on our shores.
I would think the last week.
Yeah, what about July 26th?
I am away until the 27th.
It's
Joe,
perfect. You have planned perfectly.
He's retired.
Or our next meeting was scheduled to be the 19th of the joint board, and I kind of, in my mind, tentatively said that that's probably what our full board meeting would be too.
Yep, I'm good with the 19th as well.
As I,
Anytime.
So do we want to say July 19 at 2?
That's fine.
I will just, okay. And I'll get that notice out early, probably right after the holiday. So it'll be out there for 2 weeks for people to look and.
Jim, let's, you and I talk on the 5th about that.
Okay,
Okay,
So Portland,
about the letter, and are we gonna send the draft out to the joint board?
yes. So I will, there's nothing to stop me now, beyond being on a vacation next week, with starting a draft of communication.
Okay,
So I would look to get a draft letter circulated at least the week beforehand, just so everyone can weigh in, tweak, edit, whatever, and then we'll have a final product. So we can get it out shortly after the 19th, which means it'll hit before the end of August, which is great. Okay. Can't do.
We're on to, I think we're all done communications, on to other business.
I just financially, the bills are out, they are starting to come in. We had 4 communities that had credit balances. Portsmouth, Carroll, Rye, and Waterville Valley. So they were credited, otherwise everybody else was sent a bill. And the only, I know of at least 3 or 4 communities that have already paid, and then the letter from Guilford. I will share as those come in, I'll share with the entire group what the status is of the payments prior to the 19th, so we know.
Mark, did you say the bills have gone out?
They have gone out, yes.
Have you,
And go ahead.
Mark, strangely enough, we just got our bill and they said, they just found out, we realized that we never got a bill the last time, or we thought we had paid it, but then Portsmouth said we had paid it, we never did. So I hope we don't have any other communities in the same spot.
So you probably didn't pay, got a credit.
No,
I-
Oh, no, Portsmouth, okay. I'm sorry, I had it reversed.
Yeah, I will check with Judy Belanger on that, and make sure, I'll get a report from them, everybody who paid the first round. And we'll check that and make sure that that isn't the case in any other community.
Any other business?
One minor thing, when we're beginning to include communication, even in our agendas, anything with a masthead that says Coalition of Communities or CC 2.0, could we also include the website?
Sure.
Like, quite honestly, I was driving over here and it says, I don't think I've ever looked at the website because I'm not sure that I remember what the address is. So I think we need to promote, again, as part of communication, promoting the website, making sure that people know that it's there so they can go there and see if there's anything new. Obviously, it's been a little bit static lately, but we
That's
need
fine.
to, when we send the letter probably should go on the website,
Yeah, I'll-
sort of, we need to start using the tools that are available to us
sure.
to communicate better. And I guess Resurrected Communications, what's your feel on those three other groups? We've got Reaching Higher, the School Funding Fairness Project, and now
Fiscal
the Policy Institute. Fairness seems to be trying to do their little tours again and drumming up attention during the summer. I don't know what their next venue is. The last one, as we all know, was Dover. I'm not suggesting that we have to respond to everything that they do, but if it's discernible that their activities have suddenly ramped significantly up, then we can't ignore that necessarily either. Again, that comment at the Dover is where you lay the groundwork and the tillage of we're just greedy bastards communities, and we want to try to avoid that narrative. It's not that we're greedy. It's just we also want a tax policy that's fair, not just an education policy that's fair. People continually lose sight of that.
This is not it.
No.
Yeah, I think the difference with them is they've got funders that are, looking for this action, right? And so, they've got to work towards keeping that group satisfied. And, I think in large part, they are talking to one another in a sense. Again, from the survey data that I've seen, I don't see evidence that there's this groundswell of public concern over this. That's not to say I don't invalidate.
And it's not just saying their efforts won't reignite
Sure.
that,
Yeah, but
depending on what they're planning to do.
I would expect them to be active in the cycle. They may do survey work as well, or continue to kind of roundtable it as they have. So, in any event, you're right. We shouldn't always be active and responsive. We should at least monitor and be aware at all times. But I think the first thing, our most important two universities we care about the most are our membership and the folks who are going to be in that building. next
Difficulty
January.
with our membership is those other groups that are talking to the public would then talk to the select boards and councilmen and women in our member communities. It can circulate and work against us.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I think that the spreadsheet, a simplified spreadsheet that talks about this is how much your community contributes to the SWEP. And if that were taken and provided to other communities, you'd have to make up that difference. A simplified version of that, I think, gets attached to this letter we're going to send out to just remind people, get their attention once again where we are.
Yeah.
What the risk is.
We'll include that.
With the 2021.
Yeah. Nightmares are already tearing that spreadsheet apart that ARI did. And the database, I had to find way
I think
deep
it's
in the bowels of the Department of Education.
I think it's simpler to say, this is how much your community paid to SWEP in 2021. And if all of that were taken, if it wasn't applied to your own community, and it went to some, you know, to the state fund, education trust fund, you'd have to make up that difference or make dramatic cuts or combination.
At the end of the day, it's the dollars. What is my community getting?
All right.
But yeah, putting that website will help.
Got it.
Any,
Or I hope.
any other business that needs to come before? Everybody now, I'm going to motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call vote. Mark?
Yeah, aye.
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 Aye. We are adjourned at whatever time it is.
244.
2:44.
Safe travels, Mark. Happy 4th.
Hey, thank you very much. See you later, guys.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Bye-bye.